So this is the pilot class, right? So amongst other things, I'll be looking for you all to be taking notes on what you think was going well, what you think wasn't going so well, because I will want some feedback at the end, because assuming we do decide to go forward with this, we'd like to improve it, okay? But I'm open for you guys to ask questions at any point in the process. If it turns out that it's something that I am going to address later on, I'll just tell you that, and we'll hold off and address it when the time comes. This is sort of a new experience for me. This is obviously the first time we're running it, so we're all going to learn a little bit about this together, okay? Does anybody have any questions based on Don's introduction? Okay, and my thanks to Rebecca for getting us set up to try to do this as a webinar. We did have this working just perfectly yesterday afternoon with no problems, and this morning we had the regular, this must be a demo set of bugs, but I think we're working now. I want to start just to point out that this is knowledge education, not skills education. So we're not going to be doing workshops and exercises. This is to try to communicate to you some of the basic knowledge. What is Agile about? What is it not about? What are the different types of Agile? So that you have that background as we make some decisions as to if we're going to go forward with Agile, how might we want to go forward in our first implementations, okay? So my goal here is that after we've completed this class, you will understand the fundamental concepts of what Agile is and isn't, what the potential benefits to us are of adopting Agile, what are the different elements of Agile and how we can apply them. Some people may have the impression from things they've heard or things I've seen that Agile is one thing. Agile is not one thing, okay? And we'll talk about that in this section today. Agile is basically got a set of concepts, and there's a number of different methods that have been created over time for implementing within that Agile construct. And we will talk about two of those in this section. One is called Scrum, which is the one you've probably mostly heard about, and the other one I want to focus on is something called Kanban. And we'll obviously talk more about that later. Of course, we're going to run in a different kind of an operational environment than our waterfall. We'll have to talk about how do we manage in that environment. That's a different environment. I talked about Scrum and Kanban, and we'll talk about descriptions between those particular two methods for implementing Agile. Right now, this is going to be a 7-day session. Again, this being the first time we're running it, I have scheduled it for an hour and a half each Friday. Some days you may get out early and give you back some time on your calendar. Some days we may not. It will sort of depend upon how it's going as we go through it. So plan for the hour and a half, and if I give you some time back, be happy. But we'll start with today is all about an introduction to what is Agile. Next week we'll talk about some of the foundation elements of Agile, which should be common across essentially all of the different Agile methods. Then we'll focus on the two I want to talk about, Scrum and Kanban. And then there'll be a day when we kind of wrap up and go through a summary of what we've been talking about and try to hit the high points. Any questions? So, day one. What is Agile? There's a thing called the Agile Manifesto. which essentially lays out the key concepts of what Agile is about. And we'll talk about that. And some of the principles that have evolved from the manifesto and benefits we would anticipate from utilizing Agile in our environments and the expected results. And some of that will include historical results based on people who have adopted these methodologies in the last 20 plus years, actually. So Agile is a group of software development methods where the requirements evolve through collaboration between what's called your self-organizing cross-functional teams and stakeholders. Key elements. These are integrated teams, constant participation by the customer or the customer's key representative every day is essential for success. Okay? So without that, the risk of failure goes up dramatically. Okay? So these are generally small teams working together. Teams use what we refer to as adaptive planning and view that as they go over time and recognize new requirements, because as we all know, we go through time even in waterfall, right? And something comes up and people go, oops, we missed this, right? And the waterfall method, sometimes that's very disruptive, especially depending upon where we are in the process. One of the concepts of Agile is to view those interruptions, if you will, those new requirements, as good things, not bad things. Of course, just like anything else, the later it happens in the process, it still can be somewhat more disruptive, but there's many more opportunities to identify those as you go through the Agile methodology than there is when we do the traditional waterfall approach. We talked about down to teams use adaptive planning. Teams focus on the delivery of value. So what you will see mostly that means is frequent delivery of functioning software. Okay. As opposed to we go through the waterfall method and after, depending upon how big the project or the enhancement we're doing, at the end of 3 months, 6 months, or 3 weeks, we dump one thing at the end, right? So that's what they mean by delivering value. And delivering value means, again, functioning capability, not just, hey, here's a piece that you can't use yet until you plug in another piece. And that's, again, early delivery, continuous improvement, and rapid responses to changes are promoted. And that's back to the change is not bad. Change means we're understanding what we're trying to deliver better, and we incorporate it into the process. So for a little bit of background, right, what we do today is the waterfall method, right? It's a fairly long process. We go through our requirements analysis, and then we do our design, and then we run into coding and unit test, and then we do function and system test, and then we may do a UAT, and then we deploy, and how long that takes depends upon, of course, how big the project is, and it's a fairly long process. Lots of opportunities to miscommunicate. We write requirements here, it goes to design here, have any of you guys seen this silly cartoon, right, where the people start with, here's what the requirements look like, and here's what came out of the design, here's what came out of development, and then this is what the user wanted, right? And it's all these crazy things that ended up with it. The user wanted the tire tied to the tree, and everything that's along the way looked nothing like that. So,
it's a roller coaster at the end. So the user wanted to sway with the tire,
right,
and you're going with a huge one.
Right. There's all kinds of versions of it, and unfortunately, it's very often true. Okay. So many opportunities for us to miscommunicate, and in part because there's a lot of discontinuity here, right? VAs would be involved. You guys are involved up here, right? By the time we get down to here, the technical team is heavy into coding and unit testing. You get a view of it again about here, and that's your first time you go, oops, that's somehow not looking right? So we want to give, the way one person put it, you want to fail early, right? You want to get something out and realize it's not the right thing in a couple of weeks or a couple of days, whatever the cycle is, not in 2 months or 3 months. Because the sooner you realize you're on the wrong path, the sooner you can correct and get on the right path. Okay. And when we find errors late, it can be hard to fix, right? One of the fundamental rules of software development or software product development, which is kind of the world I initially came from, is the cost to fix these things dramatically goes up the further down the stream you are, right? If you can catch it in design, it costs this much. If you can catch it in test, it costs this much. If you've deployed it, it's gone up a whole lot. And if you're a product and it's in the field and you've got 200 customers running it, it's real expensive, okay? So that's a problem with waterfall, and that's been primarily the history of software development.
Wow.
Yes?
So when you talk about continuously delivering a working product, is that in a would that be just to show the customer, like in a test environment, or are you saying you would deliver something in a actual usable production-like environment?
I'll give you the perfect answer. It depends.
Okay. Because I think what we do, it would be difficult to seemingly, just think about some of the mods and stuff we do, how we could, until you have everything, you can't say mod until you have everything in place. Now I can see it in a test environment where you put the search out there and you incrementally have a working model, but that would have to be in a non-production environment until you have everything.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So the answer is it depends upon exactly what you're trying to implement, and they will talk about application development where they would try to identify, in fact, customer deliverable initial capabilities, view them alphas, betas, and incrementally deliver more and more until you have a more full functioning, but something that's still useful in the field. You're right, in a lot of our environments, especially when we're doing an enhancement of some sort, yes, it's kind of deliver it into test, make sure it seems to be doing what we think it's doing for that part, and you may need to put multiple parts before you can put it out in the field. So one of the evolutions to try to address the waterfall defects was called spiral development. And what was done there is you do shorter iterative cycles so that you gain confidence in what you're delivering. So, you go through one cycle, and at the end of that first cycle, you have an initial prototype. And you work with the customer, you evaluate what the results of that prototype are, and decide, okay, that's pretty good, but this isn't quite right. So you adjust your requirements, and you go through the next cycle. And you iterate that through that cycle until you have a prototype that you say, this is solid, this is what we want to actually, from a functionality standpoint, be delivering. Then you go into a final development cycle, which, depending upon how you develop that code, may mean a total redevelopment because now you know what it really needs to look like and how you should have developed it, and then you push it out into the field. Okay. So you're basically designing at each cycle. It's best applied in large, complex developments where you have some level of requirements understanding, but you don't fully understand what you're going to deliver. It takes a lot longer conceptually, but you end up with what you need. Okay. So that was one step away from waterfall, but it's a step away from waterfall, but guess what? Each one of these little cycles is a mini waterfall. You go through updating the requirements, updating the design, developing, testing, and reevaluating. You just do it multiple times. Then we went to what's called incremental development. And the idea of incremental development was, we'll develop this a piece at a piece. So you will come out first, you know, her head and sort of the background. Then you'll add the left side of her body, and then we'll finish up by building the right-hand side of her body. So each increment delivers something that is in itself complete and builds some customer confidence. Yep, it's looking like I want it to look, right? And but in this model, you have a fixed length development. So now the first time we're talking about it's 2 weeks, it's 3 weeks, it's a month, it's 6 weeks, it depends. But you have a fixed cycle, you plan your work to fit within that fixed cycle, and you deliver an increment of the end product. For this to be successful, when you're up here and you've done your requirements, you know, somebody had a concept and that turned into requirements and now high-level design. Your high-level design really needs to be good. Okay. I did an incremental development project for a product at IBM that we were shipping into the field, and we broke it up into what at that point we called drivers. There were 8 drivers, there were like 5 teams, and each team delivered sort of a piece of her head. It worked, all right? We got the product out the door. We didn't get it out quite on time, despite the fixed increments. I ended up concluding that, in fact, I thought so at the very beginning, we didn't spend enough time here. So that caused some of the problems we had along the way. But this method works. You can adapt to change more easily than going through the whole waterfall. But I guess historically what's shown is it takes longer to do this than to just start at the beginning and go through a waterfall method. Okay? But you get customer confidence earlier and confidence within the team earlier, and there's a lot of value in that. So that's incremental development. Then there's iterative development. And iterative development said you're always developing sort of the whole thing, but in layers. Okay, so you have a design of what you want. Each time you do an iteration, and again, these are fixed iterations, and defined process. You add more levels until she's complete, right? Each time, the customer reviews what's coming out to make sure that their vision is evolving correctly. Okay. This is somewhat successful, but again, you have to have a pretty good view up here as to what you're going to have. But the good news is when you get here, the customer can say, no, you know, she's supposed to have glasses. Right? Where are the glasses? Those sorts of things. And then you can adapt in the next iteration and put, you know, sunglasses on her or whatever. Okay. So, what is Agile? Agile is really a melding of the incremental method we talked about here and the iterative development method, using methods that are consistent with, ta-da, the Agile Manifesto. And the Agile Manifesto came out in 2001. So we're talking 16 years ago, 15, 16 years ago. And the people who published it basically said, you know, we're uncovering better ways of doing software development. By doing that development, helping others do it, and what they found works better and that they've come to value is individuals and interactions, meaning small teams and lots of communication within the team over processes and tools. Now, that's not saying processes and tools aren't important. In fact, they point that out at the bottom. Those are important. But this is more important. Having people talking every day, working together, whether it's preferably physically co-located, but minimally some way electronically co-located so that they can talk frequently and communicate the most effective way, which is face-to-face. Okay. Working software over comprehensive documentation. So that's, once again, the goal is frequent delivery of working software, not tons of documentation. Now, that doesn't mean you don't do some documentation. It doesn't mean you don't comment your code. It doesn't mean that there may, depending on what's going on, not be some sort of spec. But you limit the documentation and focus on getting to working software. And then here we go, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, right? Well, again, that's back to having the customer as an ongoing, regular part of the team and on a daily basis. And that may mean, in our case, the appropriate business analyst, right? Now, I'll point out that when you get to this level, I'm going to say it depends. If it's in our environment, this is fine. If I'm at IBM and I'm doing a contract with somebody, having this idea of customer collaboration without a good, firm, determined contract is not something that's necessarily impossible, but it's not easy, right? Normally you have a contract that says, this is the spec, this is what you're going to deliver, right? To do something like this in that environment would require a different contracting model. And in the end, basically, you'd have to have sold the customer on what is essentially a time and materials contract that says, we're going to deliver you these iterations and you're going to see increasing value, but because you may be changing your requirements as time goes on, I can't give you a firm fixed price to deliver this. Okay. And then, again, here, responding to change over following a plan. So expecting change and accepting change, sometimes very late in the process. So again, while there's value in all this, this is the focus from an Agile standpoint.
Well, we want something with what is the proof of what is done in the majority, of course.
We'll talk about that. Okay. So we'll talk about what it means to have a project plan. And also, depending upon the method the Agile method that you adopt, the impact to the way you operate, the impact to the way we work with our executive teams changes. And different methods require different levels of buy-in on either end of the process. Okay, so I'll tell you that if you're going to do the first method we're going to talk about, which is Scrum, you have to have a fairly high level of buy-in at wherever you say you're starting this method, because it's going to look different. This is not the way that executive is used to operating, and it may be that they're giving up some confidence on exactly when something's going to be done, trading that for confidence that when it is done, it's going to be what they want. Right? Other methods will fit more closely with the way they do business today and gradually introduces change to move towards the Agile method. And that's more what Kanban does. So we'll talk about that and you'll see the differences. So, key Agile principles. 1, the highest priority is to satisfy the customer by early and constant delivery of function. So, the customer develops increasing confidence that you are producing what they want, and or they're seeing that what you want is not what they want, and maybe they didn't communicate. Maybe you all didn't communicate correctly in some of those early conversations, and so you can make early changes as needed. Okay? Welcome change suite. I talked about this several times. Agile harnesses change for the customer's benefit, meaning you go down further, depends upon how long the project was. Maybe if it's a longer project, as they've gone further down, the world has changed a little bit, and they need to do something a little bit differently, and you adapt. Again, that doesn't change the fact that the further down you are, the bigger the impact that might be. Just like in waterfall, right? If you find that out at the very end. The difference is in waterfall, you find it almost all at the very end, and in these Agile methodologies, you find the problems as you go along, as opposed to all at the end. Deliver working software frequently, again, very consistent and essential element of Agile. I talked about this. The business people and the developers have to work together daily throughout the project. And it says business people and developers, and that's a lot of what the discussion will be, but I will point out that part of that team is the change management team. So the change management team is a critical element of the team, maybe not so every day, but constantly aware of how things are evolving, so the work they're doing can evolve and produce what they need in terms of training materials, aids, whatever they're doing to support the application.
We've done it. When I did it in the past, we did participate every day, and it reduces the time we have to take from business analysts and developers, because we know what's going on every minute, and so we're learning about it, just as the developers are learning about it, and it takes a load off of the developers, because we already know what we're talking about. And we just try to fight it or teach it.
So, the horse's mouth.
So Bob, a couple quick questions. So, I assume that this is envisioned as people being co-located to be in the Agile world?
It's not absolutely essential, but it's preferred.
We have that pretty much, right? So, when you say business people, is that broad? That's VAs, obviously, with developers, but is it also the requester, like the business offices?
It will depend. I think that'll be a judgment we would have to make based on how much. Say it's a central office that's driving it, and maybe we don't have VAs that are all that close to what specifically they want. Then we probably need somebody from that office as part of the team.
Okay.
But if it's a area where the BAs are very familiar with what the customer is looking for, that you guys have been talking about it with them for a long time, then they can rely more heavily on the business analysts we have on the team to work closely, and they come in at regular intervals, certainly at every delivery point, and say, yeah, we're on track.
So that might be the decision you want to make when you start the Agile project, for lack of a better word.
Yes.
To decide how much involvement we need and how frequently from the non-BA developers.
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
So the goal about delivering the software frequently, are you saying that we would, very early on iterations, go ahead and share that with the customer, knowing that there's bugs in it and problems? And
the idea is you're delivering working software. There may be bugs. You may have to explain that. We know there are these bugs, but yes, you share it with the customer, whether the customer is you or the customer is Martha or
Chandrika.
Thank you, Chandrika.
So I think one thing that maybe this will help us with, I know we struggle with this from time to time, is bugs such ugly word, right? So it simply comes down to required misunderstanding. Whether the coder was the one who misunderstood it, or it was not given to that person correctly, or whatever. I think the idea here is that you catch that stuff early. Figure out, they're trying to make a tire swing, and it swings on the ground.
Yeah.
And we figure that out early on, so we can correct that, and the next iteration the customer sees that, it's fixed, and they have more confidence. So, right.
Exactly.
I've used this one time almost 20 years ago, not Agile, but iterative development. It was very effective for a certain type of project. So I know it can work, it's just, we got to make it work for us.
So, can I ask you a question as well? So my experience has always been that it's always know your customer, you know what the objective is, and then pick the process that's going to get you there the quickest. Waterfall has its advantages, and primarily it's when you know what you want clearly in the beginning, because then you can get to delivery quickly. Prototyping, iterative, incremental, evolved, because there were environments where you did not know the requirements well. And in fact, your customer says, I know I have this code, I don't know how I'm going to get there, and you want to start delivering and development and refine it as you go. But there were risks, because the challenge of not managing your customer's expectations with prototyping was that when they finally said, aha, that's what I want, your developer didn't necessarily build a production scalable solution. They only built something enough to be able to acquire them.
And that's
incremental was the idea of building something that you don't have to start over and develop once you nail the run.
And it depends on the scenario. Generally, if it's a fairly significant development effort, I would assert that you know exactly what the customer wants is almost always wrong.
Well, so another thing is about knowing us knowing. The customer
right.
And then being able to describe it in terms and say, now we know how to deliver. I guess I want to say that being Agile simply means use the best of all these worlds, have a good relationship with your customer, and talk frequently to make sure that what you're doing is on track.
Agile means doing these things. And so essential to that is frequent delivery of the software that's working for the customer to examine. So if customer knows exactly what he wants, right, and you believe you understand it, and you go through a waterfall method, it's waterfall with the risks associated therewith and the benefits of you knew you could go right through the waterfall and get done.
So I guess what I'm trying to get at is a lot of how you choose to develop a product is the risk involved in getting it wrong versus getting it right and timing for that.
Correct.
I don't want one of the risks of an Agile environment is that people do not understand how they're working, especially your developers. You get code out there, they'll say, I don't have to document this. When what they're really saying is, you have to make sure you document the right thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's why we're doing training, right?
That's,
So one thing I said before you arrived was, we're trying to look at this as just another tool in our toolbox to use to get work done, right? To understand when this might be useful versus other ways to do things. It could be that we decide that you can't do Agile on an I2 upgrade, but we have a pack bundle. We want to try it on that. Or we got another thing we want to try it on. So I think this is just trying to educate us as to when this might be an appropriate tool for us to leverage. Because I agree with you.
And we're consistent in how we use it.
Yeah, and
So I agree with you.
and it's a learning process, right? The first time we go through it, we're going to bump along the way, and each time we go through it, we'll learn more. And I guess I'll point out that some of the different methods, Scrum being one, Kanban being another, different methods adapt more to the different situations than others. So you'll see that Kanban is much more adaptable to the specific environment, specific ways somebody works than Scrum, which is one of the reasons why Scrum is harder sometimes to get up and operating successfully in the class. So.
But I think we did mention, I don't know if we mentioned it or not, Bob, but we have like 7 sessions for this group, and we'll tape these, but we'll have a smaller duration training, maybe 1 or 2 sessions for people on the teams that would use this, orientate them on what Agile is and what their role is to make it successful, right?
Right.
That's down the road.
And I think once we get through this, we'll have to say to ourselves, okay, are we going to adapt one or the other method?
Right.
And then how do we focus it for
Exactly.
training purposes?
I'm sorry, the reason we started my thinking of Steve's question, which is that the deliverables, deliver working software frequently, is that deliver working software in a test environment to validate, or is it actually putting functionality out for customers to use? And I guess the answer is it depends.
Exactly. It depends. It depends. And again, business people and developers working together, we talked about this. Give the team the environment, the construct, the needed support, and let them deliver. It builds motivation. One of the things about Agile is to gain confidence, the team takes more and more control of how they operate and get to the end job. Much more independence within the team. Hopefully there's very good relationships and operations within the team, and a more, I'm not sure what the right word is. Yes, there's still management around it, but not at the level of detail that you might expect in a waterfall method. Okay. And as I talked about before, the best way to communicate is face-to-face. Doesn't mean it can't work with a distributed or international team, but it does mean you have to do some special things to make that work. So, what is Agile methodology? The answer is it's lots of things. So there's a number of methodologies that fall under this, if you will, umbrella of Agile. We're going to focus on this thing called Scrum first, then on this thing called Kanban, but there's all these others, extreme programming, lean methods, and these others that follow the different, comply with the Agile Manifesto, okay? But they're just slightly different twists. But they all deliver software frequently, they all do those things that are within the manifesto. I've talked a number of times about this part. this, especially if it reaches back into the central offices, can be the biggest part of resistance, point of resistance in getting going with Agile, right? I don't have time for so-and-so to be involved in this every day, right? So that's one of the biggest challenge points, and might be why we might want to choose some of our early efforts to be ones where our BA teams are very well familiar with what needs to be delivered, so we can demonstrate that it works and get increasing buy-in on either side of the process. Benefits of Agile. And this is as compared to historic waterfall. Okay. So visibility, think of this as customer visibility, right? But it also applies to our own visibility of what we're doing. But customer visibility is an ongoing thing in Agile because you're constantly delivering working software. So they can see what you're delivering, where we're at. Whereas when you do waterfall, you get the design, the specification, the initial design here, and then basically it goes into the black hole of development, right? And we get into testing, and they get more visibility in UAT, and finally it goes. In here, high levels of customer angst. Are they really getting to what we need them to get to? Okay. So visibility to the customer is a good thing. Adaptability, we've talked about this. New requirements can be identified and incorporated in the process throughout. It's not like, okay, we write the spec up front and we're delivering against the spec, and it's only when we get down here to test and people go, that's not what we need. I know we wrote it that way, it was ambiguous, and you interpreted it this way, but it really needs to be this, right? By having the constant delivery and people seeing it, we can be much more adaptable. Now, business value. So this goes to the question that both that Maribel brought up and that Joe brought up, which is, when are you delivering this into the field? And so business value curve like this is on the presumption that you're actually able to deploy that code incrementally into the field. Okay. If you can't, if you've got to wait and build it up, then that doesn't really apply. The business value still sort of follows this. But the presumption is, hopefully, you're able to incrementally deliver. And then risk. And this, again, also ties to customer angst, right? We have a high amount of risk at the beginning of almost any project, and the risk stays high in waterfall, and it gets lower when you get to the end and see that it is what you want. But there's a lot of risk. Because we're delivering frequently and adapting frequently, the risk curve drops more quickly in an Agile environment. Any questions about that? The 10 benefits of Agile.
But some of these may not apply strictly to our environment, but demonstration.
Correct. So, revenue, right? Well, in our case, revenue is a soft term. It's more value, right? And features are delivered incrementally. This is back to getting stuff in the market that you can get paid for, right? In our case, it would be deploying into production stuff that can actually be used, which, in our sense, gives us early revenue. Speed to market. Again, this is one of the big ones. If, as Joe and Maribel pointed out, we are able to deploy increments as we go along, then speed to market is something we're achieving. If, in fact, we have to wait for more iterations, if you will, to be complete, before we can deploy to market, then you may or may not get that benefit. Quality, well, testing happens throughout the life cycle. So as you're testing each piece, you should be testing that fairly intensely, and so you should, by following this method, be building quality in as you go, and you should have an improved quality product. Visibility, we sort of talked about. This is the angst reducer, right? The customer gets to see it, so they are more comfortable. Risk management. Identify any issues early. It says any issues. And that's what I would say, that's an overstatement. You still have the risk of identifying problems late in the cycle. So I think it's more appropriate to say you start discovering issues early and you get more of them caught early. That doesn't mean you won't necessarily come up with one at the end that's going to require some significant rework. Can still happen. This is the flexibility and agility part of it, right? This, this talks about, we write a big spec up front, that's the waterfall thing, right? In Agile, it's different. We expect change. In fact, it's expected, it's desired, based on delivering frequently, confirming that it's what you want, or identifying where there are aspects of it that aren't correct, and making the adjustments. And again, this critically requires the active involvement of the stakeholders. Okay. And you'll see that in one of the methods we'll talk about, that we might have, say, our team has got the BA team as the customer rep, but at the end of each iteration, there will be a demo, and the demo goes to the higher level customer and shows that customer what we've got and what we've got delivered, and get their level of buy-in that yes, it is what I wanted. Cost control. They talk about fixed timescales, evolving requirements, but fixed timescales. So, and enabling a fixed budget. Well, yes, if you get the customer bought into, here's the budget, here's the schedule, because this is how many iterations we're going to do, and stay focused on that, because each time we deliver you something, you've got to make a decision whether we need to make that change you want, or whether we need to get on to the next step, because at the end, we're done, right? World's never quite that clean, right? And one of the things about accepting change is that, especially if the spec isn't really well developed up front, which almost by definition most of the time it isn't, when do you know you're getting scope creep or not? So, some methods of control and bounding are pretty important so that it doesn't just drag on.
This goes also to what you were talking earlier, right, in terms of saying that it's really time and materials to discuss with the customer, because they're not actually looking at the particular plan, they're looking at the deadline.
Right. 8 is back to the customer satisfaction, the fact that they have high visibility. We've talked about all this, right, a number of times. So, flexibility to change when change is needed makes the customer a lot more happy, a lot more confident in what they're getting. subject to the things we just talked about in terms of, well, how long do they actually have and how much budget do they actually have, and making the trade-offs. Customers intimately involved in making those trade-offs. And again, the idea is because they've had frequent visibility to getting the product that they wanted, or where they've had to make trade-offs, they've known about the trade-offs and they're happy to accept those trade-offs because they got 90% of what they wanted, if not 100%. And more enjoyable. And this really has to do with the team. The teams get very empowered as to what's the right next thing to work on, what are they going to deliver, how do they work as a team, and make their decisions as a team, and are working very closely, very cooperatively. The business folks have confidence in the development team they're working with. They're communicating frequently and making sure you're getting what you want, and it develops a lot of self-satisfaction within the team of seeing, yes, I'm getting stuff out the door, I'm producing what's wanted. Agile results. So this is based on a study of projects from 2002 to 2010 by the Standish Group. Unfortunately, I couldn't find, and nobody else I could find on the web could tell me how many projects that was. Okay, but given the time frame, I'm assuming it's a fairly good number. So, waterfall projects typically have a large number that is challenged, right? Overruns, schedule, and cost, not all the functions delivered. It's more the rule than the exception in reality in a waterfall development environment. This shows that there's about 14% that would be called a successful project, meaning basically on time, on cost, with essentially what the customer wanted. 29% in this sample failed. In the end, they, excuse my language, shit canned the work, and the money, the effort were lost, and the product didn't get delivered. And this applies to projects within a business, like we're operating, and it applies to product development shops like IBM, Microsoft, or whoever, who are trying to push a good product out the door to deliver to multiple customers. Now, what they've shown, based on that sample on Agile, is the failure rate goes down to a third of what it is with waterfall. There's still a fair number of challenge, but it's reduced some, and the number of successful goes up significantly. See, 42% of your projects that are viewed as successful versus 14% with waterfall. So Agile, if we do it right and in the right circumstances, can provide a much better result on average across our efforts. Questions on that? Now this is an interesting chart. This was a study of 3 different telecommunications projects where they implemented them using Agile. But they did an estimate using waterfall. Okay. So in the first project, this reflects what the waterfall estimates were. Okay. So this was 100% of the features, 100% of the time, and 100% of the cost. Now they actually implemented it using Agile, and what happened was they got all the features, They got it done in half the time, and they got it done for 90% of the cost. Now, we don't know what would happen because they did not implement the waterfall. But let me ask you the question. How many waterfall developments end up on time, on cost with features developed? Very, very few.
Yeah, look at the previous slide.
Slap back to the previous slide, right?
Yeah, I would say one experience. I mean,
That's pretty much right. Right? And the second one, here again. They got all the features, a little higher on the cost, on the time, and the cost was even a little less, but the time was it. And this is the most dramatic one. It's the third increment of this portal. They got more function, dramatically less time, and dramatically lower cost.
so I'm just curious, do we know if that's the same team working on all three?
I do not know that for sure, but given,
I would think
I
so.
think the answer is yes, but I don't know for sure.
Working together gets more efficient.
Right.
You can see that in the third one. Those are seen results.
Right. So I believe that the answer to that is yes, but I didn't see anything that
Right.
confirmed that for sure.
Yeah, I'm assuming that too. I just didn't know you for sure. That's promising.
And so finally, where is the industry going? Now, this is a sampling of some 600 development and IT professionals by HP. It was an online survey in 2015-2016, so not a scientific sample if you're talking about sampling theory and all that, right? But still, it's 600 different professionals talking about where is their organization going. And 2% were sticking with waterfall. Another 7% were leaning towards sticking with waterfall. 24% were looking at some hybrid approach, and I'm not quite sure what that means. That may mean sometimes we do waterfall, sometimes we do agile. It's not exactly clear. 16% were already dedicated to using agile, and half were saying this is the direction we're going. We're going to move into the agile world. Any questions? Okay, so that's it for today. Next week, we'll talk about the foundation elements of Agile. And that talks about the Agile team, who's on the team, and there's two kinds of teams. There's the execution team, and then there's sort of an executive team. We'll talk about the Agile framework, and we'll talk about user stories and estimations, which are ways of basically defining things that need to be implemented. So that's kind of headlights to next week. So I'm giving you back 15 minutes, not too bad. Anybody have any questions before we wrap?
I think one of the things to kind of keep in mind to do that approach is the thought process has to change. You've got to kind of think in smaller chunks, in phases, and this in phases can be done so that it can be shown to the customers at least, right? So breaking down things into phases which are within themselves individually, these entities can be coded, tested, and delivered. So that's kind of how the process has to be. So again, I may be jumping a little bit ahead from what Bob's schedule is, but I'm just saying that the thought needs to be seated in your minds when you start thinking along those lines as we move forward with this course.
That's exactly right.
You learn that lesson.
I think you're right. I think some of the way we work, just the request from the customers are either a piece here, they build onto it later.
That's what I said to say is better than that.
It probably depends who you ask.
Anybody else have any observations? Okay, if nothing else, thank you very much, and